Today we have Yom Pagra twice, and I'm going to talk about Tu BiShvat. Okay, that's going to be my topic. I'm talking about Tu BiShvat. Chamisha Asar BiShvat. There's 4 Rosh Hashanas. Do you know that? There's 4 Rosh Hashanas needed. The Mishnah says Arba Rosh Hashanah before Rosh Hashanas. Why do we have 4 Rosh Hashanas? Because Rosh Hashanah means the beginning of a year, and a year means a cycle, right? The word Shana in Hebrew means Mishnah, which means change, and it means Mishnah, which means repetition, right? Both the word Shana connotes the same thing over and over again, and the word Shana connotes all different change. In other words, during the course of a year, you have 4 seasons or 6 seasons. That's change, and every year they repeat themselves. So the Hebrew word Shana, ironically, means 2 things. It means change and sameness, change and repetition. So, if you have 4 areas of seasons, you have to have 4 Rosh Hashanas. Meaning to say, if different things have different seasons, then for each of those different things, you need a different beginning of the year. Okay, for example, when it comes to animals, Rosh Hashanah is Aleph Elul. The first day in Elul, which is August, is Rosh Hashanah for animals, meaning all the animals born before Aleph Elul belong to the previous year, all animals born after Aleph Elul belong to the subsequent year. And if you're going to ask me who cares, it's a great question. The answer is going to be, it matters about Maisa Behema. Right? When you have livestock, you have to bring karbonos, you have to give 1/10 of the animals to the Beis HaMikdash. So you take all the animals from one season. The season ends Lamed Menachem or Chavtes Menachem. From Aleph Elul is the new year, and you're supposed to separate how you separate Maisa Behema from one year to the next. Meaning to say, if in one year you had 9 animals, there's no need to give Maiser. If the second year you had 9 animals, you don't have to give Maiser. If you join them together, you have 18 animals to give Maiser. The cutoff point about whether I have 10 animals to give Maiser is Aleph Elul. Why Aleph Elul? Which is sometime in August. I suppose the answer is because animals' birthing season revolves around Elul. In other words, either all the animals are born before Elul, which was how I assume it is, or animals are born after. Most animals have a season. They're born any time of the year. All the animals are born at the same time of the year. So the cutoff point when it comes to animals is Aleph El. So it's called Rosh Hashana L'Maaseh Behema. Rosh Hashana means to say, since during the course of the year there's all kinds of changes, Aleph El is Rosh Hashana L'Maaseh Behema. Okay? You understood that, right? Now, there is a religious Rosh Hashana. A religious Rosh Hashana means it doesn't have to do with science, it doesn't have to do with Teva, it has to do with Yiddishkeit. The religious Rosh Hashana is Aleph Nisan. Rosh Chodesh Nisan is Rosh Hashana for all things that are not connected to Teva. It's just the way the Torah was established. That Aleph Nisan is Rosh Hashana for all kinds of things. Okay, and then you have 2 more Rosh Hashanas, which have to do with many things, but amongst them they have to do with agriculture. Agriculture means plants, things that grow. And of course, agriculture is important because there's a lot of mitzvahs connected to agriculture. You have Bikurim, you have Truma, you have Maisa, you have Maisa Sheni, you have Neter Avoy. And you also have Maisa Sheni, you have Shviyas, you have Shemitah, and you have Yovel. So you have to know when the Rosh Hashanah is when it comes to agriculture. And basically, Aleph Tishrei, the first day in the month of Tishrei, is, of course, Rosh Hashanah is Rosh Hashanah for creation. And it's Rosh Hashanah for grains, for wheat and the 5 grains, and for all things that grow from the ground, legumes and things like this. Aleph Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah when it comes to things that grow from the ground. Okay? Except for trees. Rosh Hashanah is Chamisha Asar BiShvat. Okay? So what I just tried to present to you is, and I'm going to say what I said before now, but I'm going to say it in different words. There's 2 ways to understand Rosh Hashanah. Either Rosh Hashanah has to do with nature, or Rosh Hashanah has to do with Hashem. We have 4 Rosh Hashanahs. 3 of those 4 have to do with Teva. Animals birth either before or after Aleph Elul, so Aleph Elul is the cutoff point for animals. grains and other things that grow from the ground, they birth before Aleph Tishrei. So Aleph Tishrei is the new year when it comes to grain, when it comes to beans and other vegetables and so on and so forth. In Shvat, you have the Rosh Hashana for trees, which I'm going to get to in a moment. Either it's Rosh Chodesh Shvat or it's Chamisha Asar BiShvat is Rosh Hashana Le'ilan, because tree years begin in Shvat. I'm going to explain that in a moment, okay? The fourth Rosh Hashana is not connected to Teva, to nature, it's connected to Torah. The Eibishter was keveh that Aleph Nisan is Rosh Hashana for Yom Tov, for Malachim, for things that have to do with religion. Meaning to say, you're not going to be able to explain them in the Teva of the creation. This is Rosh Hashana for Yonam of Torah and Mitzvahs. So let's go forth. Let's trade to Chamisha Asar BiShvat. We have Rosh Hashana Le'ilan. We have a new year for trees. The new year for trees, like I told you, has to do with the fact that fruits, like most plants, have a season. Does anybody know which is the fruit that doesn't have a season? What's the exception to the rule? You could have learned this even... No, Essig, yeah, Essig. Essig continues to grow, but that's not the one I'm looking for. Because Essig continues growing. There are fruits that grow and ripen and fall off, but they can happen any time of year. The answer is figs. Figs is one of the most unusual fruits in the world. You can read this in biology. If you study rainforest, you know that many animals live on figs, because figs don't have a season. There's a lot of unusual halachas about figs for this reason. There's dinim about figs that are different than any other fruit because they don't have a season. Essig doesn't have a season, but there's a difference. What's the difference between an essig and a fig? A fig grows, and when it's ripe, it falls off. An essig just keeps on growing. An essig never stops growing. It grows and it grows and it grows. It can grow, it says in the Marash, 12 seasons. An essig can go for 3 years in a row and it'll be this big, the size of a melon. Unless you cut the essig off the tree, it keeps on growing. A fig has no season, but it'll fall off a tree. Now, why is the new year for trees in Shvat? There's a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says Rosh Chodesh Shvat Rosh Hashana Le'ilan. Beis Shammai says, Beis Hillel says Chamisha Asar BiShvat. And by the way, I learned the Maimon now this year, which is part of the motivation that I have to talk about Chamisha Asar BiShvat, where the Rebbe says that after Mashiach comes, we're going to pass like Beis Shammai, and Rosh Chodesh Shvat is going to become Rosh Hashana Le'ilan. And the Rebbe goes on to say that after Mashiach comes, you could make an argument that Rosh Chodesh Shvat, Rosh Hashana Le'ilan, is going to become more important than Rosh Hashana Ledagon, which is Aleph Tishrei. Because after Mashiach comes, the world is in a different Ma'amad Matziv, and it's arguable that the most important Rosh Hashanah is going to be the Rosh Hashanah for fruit, as opposed to Rosh Hashanah for grains and legumes and so on and so forth. Maybe I'll get back to it later, okay? But there's a fourth Rosh Hashanah, which is Rosh Hashanah Le'ilan. Now, here's what you have to understand. The new year for trees is not defined by when fruit ripens. Most Rosh Hashanahs are defined by when the animals are born. When the grains grow, when the vegetables grow. The new year for trees is not defined by when the fruit ripen. The new year for trees is defined when the new year begins. Why? Trees are different than grains. Trees are different than vegetables. Trees are different than legumes. How so? Every year you want wheat to grow, you have to plant seeds again. Right? You plant seeds, wheat grows. Comes the summertime, you plant it again. It's not like you put seeds in the ground and every year wheat grows out of the ground. You have to replant them. The same is true for vegetables, the same is true for grains, for legumes, for beans, and for other kinds of things, right? A tree is different. Why? You plant a tree once and every year it gives you fruit. And trees, many trees sleep. Trees hibernate. Just like there are many animals when it gets too cold, right? Like bears, like bats, and many other animals, they go into a state of torpor, they go into like their body metabolism is reduced, their body temperature is lowered, and they sleep through the coldest part of the year. And when it gets warm again, they sort of wake up, right? Bats can be almost freezing. If it's 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius outside, the bat's temperature is 33. It's 1 degree above zero. It's almost frozen. And then when the spring comes, it wakes up. And the heart starts to beat. And it's it's whatever it is, and it does its thing. Trees also sleep. At the end of the season, trees go to sleep. the leaves fall off the tree. Whatever energy the tree has is put back into the roots, whatever the case is, and the tree is at rest. It doesn't want to waste energy keeping itself alive when there's no reason to. And the tree waits for the new season. And when the new season starts, the tree wakes up.
If anything, in the winter, just like us, we need to bundle up because it's cold outside. I know it doesn't technically make sense because trees don't feel the cold, but like, shouldn't in the winter trees have leaves and in the summer it shouldn't because it's the heat? But technically, sunlight makes trees grow leaves, but it kind of has the opposite effect, kind of.
You know what a mammal is?
Yeah.
Mammals are called endotherms. You know what that means?
They warm up
from inside. To warm up from inside means you have to fuel your furnace with a lot of energy. It's called a metabolic rate. A metabolic rate means the number of calories you need to keep your furnace from the inside at a constant temperature. It's very, very expensive. It's very hard to do. Now, people have a few advantages. One of them is we have homes. Another one is we have heat. Another one is we have clothes. And another one is we have a very, very sophisticated way of harvesting food. You understand? Animals don't have all those advantages. So what do animals do when they live in cold climates if they're not going to have enough energy to maintain that internal temperature? The Eibishter gave mamash a nest that they go to sleep. What they do is they turn off. They don't die, but they almost die. Instead of their heart beating so many times a minute, they beat so many times an hour. The body temperature drops, and most of the external organs are limp. Just some parts of the brain, some parts of the heart, and the more efficient they are at hibernation, the more they reduce their energy and their energy output, and they live on their reserves. Now, peoples don't do that, number one, because they don't need to, and number two, because they can't. You understand? Trees can't do that either. For a tree to continue keeping leaves fresh takes energy from inside the tree. So leaves are not there for clothes. Leaves are there to collect sunlight. But in order for the leaf to collect sunlight, the tree has to give out a lot of energy to keep those leaves fresh. And at one point in the year, the tree doesn't have enough reserves to keep the leaves fresh, so it lets them die, and they fall off. Okay, when is the new year for trees? When trees wake up. The new year for trees is not when the trees harvest. When the tree wakes up, that's the new year for trees. I want to mention, this is why trees have rings. You know that? Trees have rings. A ring, every ring in a tree represents a year. So if a tree is 20 years old, it's going to have 20 rings. If a tree is 50 years old, it's going to have 50 rings. If a tree is 3,000 years old, it's literally going to have 3,000 rings. And if you studied this, you know that you can look at the rings of a tree and see what kind of seasons they were. If the ring is very thin, it was a season with poor water. If the ring is very thick, it was a more fertile year. You can literally study the history of this tree by studying its rings. What you don't know is that animals that hibernate, like polar bears, for example, if you cut their teeth, they also have rings. For the same reason. Because when they stop, when they go to sleep, there's an interruption of all metabolic function. When they wake back up, it's renewed, and there's a ring that marks. You can tell the age of a bear by doing a vertical slice of its tooth and seeing how many rings. You'll know how old it is. But the new year for trees is when the tree wakes up. Wakes up means the tree knows that soon it's going to become spring, the days are going to become longer, it's going to become warmer, which means, amongst other things, there will be a supply of water as opposed to snow and ice, and there will also be carbon in the atmosphere, and there'll be longer days with more sunlight. The tree wakes up to receive the sunlight and to use the energy that it gets from the combination of the sun and the water in order to feed itself, to produce the fruit that grows on the trees, and to exhale the oxygen. That's what Rosh Hashana Le'ilah means. Rosh Hashana Le'ilah means when the trees wake back up. Now, there's no machlokes in Metzias. Everybody agrees that Beis Shammai is right. In Eretz Yisrael, not in Brooklyn, in Eretz Yisrael, trees wake up Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Trees wake up Rosh Chodesh Shvat. So if trees wake up Rosh Chodesh Shvat, why do Beis Hillel delay the New Year for trees for 2 weeks till Chamisha Asar BiShvat? The answer is because the Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel hold you do not make Rosh Hashana until there's evidence that the tree woke up. 2 weeks after the tree wakes up, the Lashon and the Chazal is that the sap, the soraf, which is in the roots, climbs back up into the bark. I mean, you guys are aware of this? That the bark of a tree are the veins. Trees are inside out. They have their plumbing on the outside. The wood of a tree is dead. It's nothing. The life of a tree is in the veins of a tree. We have our veins inside our body. Trees have their veins. If you go over to any tree and peel off a complete ring, one strip of bark all the way around, the tree dies. Because the veins of the tree are the bark. And the bark has to go up till the top, till the very top of the tree to bring life to every part of the tree. The Lashon Chazal is the sap that climbs up from the roots into the tree to give life to the tree, all the way until its leaves. So Beis Shammai holds, you make Rosh Hashana when the tree wakes up. Beis Hillel holds, you make Rosh Hashana when you see evidence of the tree being alive. This is the Pshat, Rosh Hashana Le'ilan, is Rosh Chodesh Shvat, or Chamisha Asar BiShvat. You wanted to say something? Now, so this is Rosh Hashana Le'ilan. Now, of course, traditionally, Rosh Hashana Le'ilan was not a big deal. When you were in kindergarten, they made Rosh Hashana Le'ilan. Who bothered with Rosh Hashana Le'ilan? The only thing we know about Rosh Hashana Le'ilan is you don't say Tachnan. Chamisha Asar BiShvat, we don't say Tachnan. Oh, fine. And even this is already a newer minhagim, right? The Rebbe made Chamisha Asar BiShvat into a huge yomtiv, a big deal. He fabrengt for many, many, many years on Chamisha Asar BiShvat, and he spoke about it. I always say that the Rebbe has his days, his own holidays. He didn't create them, but he took them out of the deep freeze. He took days that until that point people were ignoring, and he made them into a big deal. I guess you could say Sfardim made a bigger issue out of Rosh Hashana Le'ilanis. The Rebbe made a big deal out of Rosh Hashana Le'ilan. And this is what I want to share with you. How the Rebbe explains the shturim, the big deal that he made out of Rosh Hashana Le'ilanis. And there are a number of different aspects to this. There are a number of different aspects to this idea of Rosh Hashana Le'ilan. And I'm going to start with the last one. I'm going to start with what I just learned in a Maimer, which is motivating me to do this all together. Okay? The difference between Rosh Hashana Le'ilan and Rosh Hashana for Dagon and for Yerakes. In other words, the difference between Chamisha Asar BiShvat and Aleph Tishrei is Rosh Hashana Le'ilan is for fruit. Rosh Hashana Aleph Tishrei is for bread, for Dagon. In other words, we have a Rosh Hashana where we celebrate that Hashem feeds us. We have another Rosh Hashana where we celebrate that Hashem gives us pleasure. You do not need fruit to survive. Fruit are a luxury. Fruit are tasty, they're sweet, and they're also very pretty. It's one of the many gifts the Eibishter gave the world is fruit. If the Eibishter created only grain, only bread, and potatoes, we'd survive just fine. The Eibishter gave us food to eat, which is not only necessary for our survival. The Eibishter gave us food so we should enjoy His world. The Eibishter wants to have pleasure from His world. So if you wanted to say it in different words, what's the difference between Rosh Hashana Aleph Tishrei, where we're celebrating the new year for bread and for grain and for beans and for vegetables, and Rosh Hashana Chamisha Asar BiShvat? The difference is, one, we're celebrating that Hashem feeds us, Hashem gives us mezoinos, and the other is that Hashem gives us pleasure. La'edon l'tainek. Fruits are there to pleasure us. We should enjoy Hashem's world. Literally. And in the nusach that we say, in Bein Nefashos Rabbos v'Chesreinon, Al Keil Masha V'Rot L'Achayis Behem, it says in Halacha, Bein Nefashos Rabbos v'Chesreinon means, thank Hashem for the food He gave us. Al Keil Masha V'Rot L'Achayis Behem goes on peiros, on fruit. It's two separate things. You thank Hashem for giving us life, and you thank Hashem for giving us pleasure. This is the Chiddush of Chamisha Asar BiShvat. We're celebrating not just that we live, but that we're able to enjoy life. Now, I don't want to get into this whole shtick with you, but you could almost say that this is one of the differences between people and animals. And it's really true in the case of most animals, not all animals. Animals survive. Animals keep themselves alive. They eat to stay alive. Animals have three things in their life. Not get eaten, eat, and have babies. That's it. Human beings who are created in the image of God, Hashem is not satisfied with the idea that they live. Hashem wants us to enjoy His world. He covered the earth with trees. And He put on many of these trees fruit. And I'm sure you've heard this word before, that before Adam and Chava ate from the Eitz Hadas, Teva Ra, every single tree bore fruit. We live in Brooklyn, right? Most of the trees on our sidewalks, those blocks that still have trees, don't have any fruit. And the few that do are these small, brown, orangey little fruit that fall to the ground and stink up the whole sidewalk. You can't wait for them to go away, right? Could you imagine every single tree having fruit? You know, there are places in the world, you go to California, you have a whole street with one kind of tree. And sometimes the name of the street is after the tree. The entire street is planted with cherries, or with boxer, with carob. Every tree is different. And then on every tree, you watch them fall to the ground, and then they rot, and they stink, and someone has to come and clean them up, because people don't bother collecting them. When the Eibishter created the world, before Chet Etzas, every single tree bore fruit, and fruit are there not because we need them to survive, fruit are there to give people pleasure. And the Rebbe brings in a sicha from a sefer which is called Avodat HaKodesh, that after Mashiach comes, it will be reversed back to how it was before Chet Eitz Hadas, that you will not, every single tree in the world will produce edible fruit. And fruit are first of all beautiful, and second of all tasty. And al pi Torah, they are there for the pleasure of mankind. Did you understand what I just told you? Right? So in plain English, we're not talking here esoteric things and pneumistic things. The Eibishter created human beings that they shouldn't only live, they should enjoy their life b'gashmis, have pleasure from their life. And you could explain this not just religiously, you should push it, explain it psychologically. The sign of wholesomeness, the sign of health, is that you have time to relax, that you have time not just to do things that you must do, but that you have time to do things that you don't have to do, but you're choosing to do them because the Eibishter gave you time. That's the meaning of the word pleasure. There are very, very few animals who have that. There are some who do. Most animals' lives are so difficult that everything that they're doing is keeping them alive. Human beings are created by the Eibishter that they shouldn't only live, survive, but they should live. And you could say that you want to know what's Chamisha Asar BiShvat, level 1, that the Eibishter created for people, a garden, oise peiros, that produces fruit, so they shouldn't only live, but that they should also have pleasure. And of course the challenge is that we should live like Yidden, that we should use the food that we have and the pleasure that the Eibishter gives us to make us better people rather than more animalistic. But this is a gift to a very, very great extent. Not 100%, but to a very great extent is what separates human beings from animals. Animals don't have these luxuries for all kinds of reasons. Okay? Anybody want to say anything? Don't be afraid of me, only bark. Go ahead.
Aren't we supposed to not take pleasure in this world?
That's a higher level. That's a skafia. But we're talking now about pashtus. And the idea that a person is not supposed to take pleasure in this world is not that he shouldn't have any pleasure. It's that by not having physical pleasure, he's able to have spiritual pleasure. But you have to have pleasure. You know what's pleasure in Yiddishkeit? Shabbos. Shabbos is the pleasure. Einik Shabbos. Some people say Einik Shabbos is a piece of kugel. Another person has Einik Shabbos because he experienced Tainagel key, but it's Einik Shabbos. So pleasure is the ultimate expression of life. I'm not just surviving, I'm living, you understand? Now, let's do a little biology, okay? Not much biology, a little biology. How did your science teacher explain to you why trees have fruits? How did your science teacher explain to you why trees' fruits are sweet? How did your science teacher explain to you why the fruits on the trees are beautiful and are brightly colored? Does anybody remember?
It starts off as a flower and it gets its energy from the sunlight and the water produces glucose, and it basically grows into a fruit that has liquid in it that's filled with juice that is sweet because it produces a type of sugar.
I'm asking you a question. It's very expensive. Why is the tree wasting energy to do this?
Why is the tree wasting energy
to make the fruit sweet and beautiful?
It's not a conscious being. God is making the trees create fruit.
In biology, everything has an explanation. You know the answer?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So in the fruit there are seeds, and when birds or insects eat from the fruit, they eat the seeds, and then when they make the waste, it comes out and then it gets planted and more cheese.
In biology, fruit, nothing likes to be eaten. Everything wants to live, right? Nobody wants to be eaten. Everybody wants to eat. Nobody wants to be eaten. Fruit are an advertisement. Eat me. It's brightly colored, so it's very easy to see. It's very, very tasty. It's very easy to digest. Why are trees producing fruit, which is basically giving away its energy? Because inside the fruit there's seeds. And the trees can't walk. The trees want that animals should come and eat the fruit, carry the fruits away in their guts, and pass them out as waste, and the seeds are going to rot and grow a tree someplace else. That's the scientific explanation. The scientific explanation for fruits is seeds. In other words, the scientific explanation for fruits is there should be more trees. But that's not the Torah explanation for fruit. The Torah explanation for fruit is that people should eat and enjoy. It's a byproduct. It's also true that fruits are there to produce seeds, which then come out in the excrement and the waste of different animals, and they replant it. But when Torah speaks about why trees produce beautiful and tasty fruit, it's because the Eibishter gave them for people to enjoy. Now, I want you to understand what I'm telling you here. This is a very, very important lesson. Okay? Have you ever seen the recycling symbol? Yeah? Yeah, how does the recycling symbol look? It's a circle of arrows. It's a circle of arrows, right? It's called the cycle of life, the ecological cycle. What does the circle indicate? The circle indicates everybody needs everybody. Everybody eats and is eaten by another, and it goes around and around in a circle. The plants and the animals and the people are nourished and nourish one another in a cycle of life. And of course, you learned this in high school. You don't want to interrupt the web of life. If you take one of the creatures out, it messes up the whole thing. Everything gets messed up, right? Torah also has a cycle. But it's not a circle, it's a line. In Torah, we speak about ecological systems, but it's not that the earth feeds the plant feeds the animal, and the animal feeds the plant feeds the earth. It's the earth feeds the plant feeds the animal feeds the person serves Hashem. It's a direction up. So when you ask the question, why did Hashem create fruits? And why did He make them beautiful? And why did He make them tasty? There's two answers that are very different, but they're not contradictory. It's two different levels. Science says, so there should be another tree. Torah Lahagel Elef Avdali says to give pleasure to a human being, because the Eibishter created the world to be a garden for people, which is true. They're both true. But which is the ikid and which is the tafel? What is the reason? That's the real reason why this is. Because the Eibishter wants people to live in a garden and have pleasure. So understand what I've just done. I've given you a brand new Chamisha Asar BiShvat. I'm going to go out on a limb and say you never heard this before. What's Chamisha Asar BiShvat? About human beings having pleasure. The Eibishter gave us a Rosh Hashana for tainug. He gave us a Rosh Hashana for mazain, for food, for sustenance. It has to do with nature, it has to do with seasons, it has to do with ecology. That's Aleph Tishrei. And He gave us a Rosh Hashana for pleasure. That's either Rosh Hashana Chodesh Shvat according to Beis Shammai, or Chamisha Asar BiShvat according to Beis Shammai, but it's all about a human being having pleasure. Go ahead.
Is it pleasure, like in Torah, like you can't, like not that it's...
That's already a higher level. To do iskafia. The reason to do iskafia is to open yourself to a higher pleasure. But the Eibishter made human beings in His image. We're in the image of God. Not just Jews. All of humankind. And Hashem wants us to experience pleasure.
Okay, so I heard that, and my question is called, why is there a whole Yom Tov dedicated to pleasure? That's what you're saying.
Why is there Yom Tov dedicated to pleasure? Because pleasure is the sign that you're living. There's two words. There's surviving and there's living. Animals survive. Human beings are not meant to survive. Human beings are meant to live. The proof of pleasure is that you have free time. The Eibishter gave you a life. Now you maximize it. As I said, this is a higher level. What you do with your life. But the Eibishter created people not just to survive, but to have free time. Right? Most animals are always looking over their shoulder that someone's going to come and eat them. Human beings have walls, and they're not afraid someone's going to eat them. They don't have to be afraid. Human beings have fire, so they can see at night, so they're not afraid of the boogeyman. And on and on and on, because the Eibishter created people to represent Him in this world, and He wants them to live. The sign of life is pleasure. Now, then you get to choose what kind of pleasure.
Right.
And this is where avodah comes in. But before you talk avodah, the Eibishter gave human beings a Rosh Hashana for pleasure.
You're saying that Hashem wants us to have pleasure,
Yep.
right? But but then at the same time He wants us to do the things that give Him pleasure, right? So
Okay, now you're talking religion. Now you're talking Torah mitzvahs.
But that's what I'm trying to understand, because what you're saying is that Hashem wants us to have pleasure, and then at the same time He wants us
Not at the same time, on top of that.
on top of that, He wants us to give Him pleasure by serving Him. But what if that doesn't give us pleasure? So it's a contradiction. It's going
Okay, so this is a psychological question.
How do I-
And I'm going to give it, because the idea that serving Hashem doesn't give me pleasure is proof that there's something wrong with my service.
Right.
My service Hashem is supposed to give me pleasure.
It's supposed to give
So here's my psychological answer. And I'm not trying to open up a can of worms or give you a tatum. The proof that a person, the basis for a person to get pleasure from giving Hashem pleasure is if he gets pleasure from the physical world. When a person does not get pleasure from the physical world, then when they serve Hashem, they don't get pleasure from serving the Eibishter. If they first, and I don't mean first necessarily in time, I mean first in madrega. If a person is able to experience pleasure on the physical level, they are now open to experience pleasure from ideas, from deeper things, including the ultimate pleasure that a person can get from giving pleasure to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Right, so that's where I'm struggling to understand. Getting pleasure from physical things, that means a lot of things, right? And there's some things that Hashem doesn't want us to get pleasure from, like movies or stuff like that, or things that are, maybe not Hashem, but that are like kind of like against what He wants from us. So if you get pleasure from that, you still don't get pleasure from serving Hashem, and you get pleasure from fruit, and you get pleasure from eating, but that doesn't usually translate into pleasure in serving Hashem.
In other words, pleasure can become self-destructive.
Yeah.
We can use pleasure excessively.
Yeah, that's
We
why-
can use pleasure in wrong ways. Point well taken. That's part of the test of being a person. Part of the test of being a person is managing our lives rather than having our lives manage us. And human beings are severely sick in that area. Do you know that most animals, if you will give them food that's not healthy, that tastes good, they won't eat it. No. Just higher apes. Monkeys and higher apes will eat food that's self-destructive. However you want to explain it, animals in nature only eat what's good for them. We were given the gift of pleasure, and we were given the challenge of pleasure. I'm not going into the challenge of pleasure, I'm talking about the ideal of pleasure. The proof that you're human, that you live and don't survive, is that you have pleasure. You know what's a classic example of pleasure? Really the best example of pleasure? A hobby. Hobbies serve no purpose. Animals don't have hobbies. The human being's ability to have a hobby is a symptom that he doesn't only survive, he lives. This human being who lives now has to live for a higher purpose. You're right, there's always the ability for abuse. But we're not talking about the abuse side. We're talking about the optimum side, what Hashem gave us. And Hashem gave us, human beings, this Bracha, that we're supposed to live and not just survive. And
Pleasure is a balance.
Of course it's a balance. These are ideas that are probably more in the sichos of the Rebbe. Your point is well taken.
Because now that we talk this through, it makes a lot of sense.
We have a lot of distortion about balance and health in Yiddishkeit. And there's a lot of reasons why. I would say that if I had to answer your question, the answer would be because we have so much pleasure that's destructive. Why say that it's a good thing when we're using it in such a destructive way anyway? But this is why I'm doing this. I'm presenting you with a different perspective on Chamisha Asar BiShvat. The Eibishter created the world for people to have pleasure. It's true. I have 5 more minutes. Okay, so what did I teach you? What did we do? Chamisha Asar BiShvat is the new year for fruit. What is the meaning of the new year for fruit? It's every year we have a season of tainug, of pleasure. So I want you to know that I learned in a Maimer, which really to a great extent triggered this entire thing. And the Rebbe says, what does this mean in Ruchnius? It means Torah. The Torah which is associated with Rosh Hashana, Aleph Tishrei, is Nigla. The Torah which is associated with pleasure and with fruit, which is either Aleph Shvat or Chamisha Asar BiShvat, is Pnimiyas HaTorah, is Chassidus and Kabbalah. And this is the suggestion in the Maimer that after Mashiach comes, the Ikir pleasure is going to be from Pnimiyas HaTorah, and therefore there's an argument to be made, and I'm not saying that this is 100% Pshat in the Maimer, this is how I understand the Maimer, that after Mashiach comes, the Ikir Rosh Hashana is not going to be Aleph Tishrei, the Ikir Rosh Hashana is going to be Aleph Shvat, not Chamisha Asar BiShvat, because we're going to paskin like Beis Shammai. Aleph Shvat is going to become like the new year, because after Mashiach comes, the level of the world is on a madrega Pnimiyas HaTorah, which is tainug, pleasure, but not pleasure from a piece of fruit. Pleasure from understanding Seides HaTorah. This is an insight into Chamisha Asar BiShvat, into Shana Le'ilam, and it explains a little bit, why the Rebbe made such a big deal out of Chamisha Asar BiShvat. Chamisha Asar BiShvat, girls, I want to say this one more time. And I'm not speaking about avodah, and I'm not talking about iskafia, and I'm not talking about holiness. I'm speaking about the simple fact of the matter. Chamisha Asar BiShvat, we celebrate that the Eibishter created the world for people. For people. Not like the scientists say, that the world was created for life, and all forms of life feed and are fed by one another. We don't believe in that. It's scientifically true, it's physiologically true, it's biologically true. But that's only the chitzonius. The chitzonius is, if people don't feed animals, and animals don't feed plants, and plants don't feed the earth is not going to feed the plant, and the plant's not going to feed it. It's a circle of life, there's no question about it. But al pi Torah, it's not a circle of life, it's a line of life. And at the top of that spearhead is a human being. The Eibishter created the world for people, and the indicator, or one of the indications, that the world was created for human beings, that Hashem doesn't want us only to live. Hashem wants us to have pleasure. I heard the expression, you may have heard the expression before, fruit are nature's candy. It's true. Fruit, God created. The movies were created by people. I didn't want to get into the whole thing. Fruit is nature's candy. The candy that the Eibishter created is very, very tasty, whatever it is that you like, peaches, or apricots, or the Shivas Haminim, grapes, and figs, and pomegranates, if you can get the seeds out, and dates. This is the pleasure that the Eibishter gives to his world, because he wants human beings to experience pleasure. So we have a Rosh Hashana where we're thanking the Eibishter, if you think about it, for being human. And the Rosh Hashana for thanking the Eibishter for being human is that the Eibishter created the entire world for us. That because the Gan Ilonois Oisepeire. You know what the Rebbe says about Basi Lagani. What does Basi Lagani mean? The world is a garden. A garden doesn't grow wheat. Gardens grow trees that bear fruit that give pleasure. Basi Lagani. Gane Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a place of pleasure. And human beings are distinct, are different than other creations. Hashem wants them to experience pleasure. Right? Now, again, you want to talk about iskafia and higher pleasures? I'm not going to debate that. But before you get to the higher levels, you must understand the elementary idea. One of the ways that people are different than animals is that God gave us this earth because He wants us not just to live and survive, He wants us to experience pleasure. Okay? Any more questions or comments? Others will call it a class.
He wants us to experience what?
Pleasure, tainuk, pleasure, to enjoy his world. It sounds very un-Hasidish, but it's not. It's the first step. Chassidus is a second step, or a third step, or a fourth step. And again, we're not talking here about Yidden, we're talking about mankind, human beings. We're created in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay? No questions or comments, besides the fact that you may think what I said is apocryphal. But I assure you, I didn't make it up. You know why? Because it sounded good. And if it sounded good, I took it from someplace. Verstehst?